This is just kind of going to be probably a little different. I don't know what the other lectures that you guys have had before, but I asked them a little bit up in the office, and they said, oh yeah, most of the people we have come in here are business people. And I don't consider myself a business person, although I have started a company. I started several companies and sold one of them, but I consider myself a software engineer. So just for entertainment, this is a picture of me when I was at BYU in '92, just before I was about to leave. I actually got recruited by Novell when I actually worked in this building. I was the network administrator for the faculty. So I used to go around. This is before, I mean, you guys wouldn't even imagine the kind of stuff I had to do. It was mostly like replacing video cards and junk like that. But it was a really fun job. This is a little bio of me. I worked at Novell for a number of years. I actually left Novell and went back a couple times, and you can see other companies. Caldera was a Linux company that built a Linux desktop, which doesn't really exist anymore. The company doesn't really exist anymore. And I had a really small stint at working for the church, actually. It was about 7 months. And they actually recruited me to go. They had this old DOS-based program called PATH. I don't know if anyone here has even heard of it, but it was called Personal Ancestral File. It was for doing genealogy, and they didn't know what to do with it. And so they had me go up there, and they wanted me to open source it and turn it into this open source free product. And I was up there for about 3 months, and we presented our plan on what we were going to do. And they decided, we better not do this. It's not going to be good for the market, because they didn't want the church to put out something that would hurt all the people that were making software. Anyway, they decided to shut it down, and that's the only reason I went up there. So I left, and in 2008, I started Appigo, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I currently have a new startup called Snipflick, which I'm also not going to talk about because we haven't really released anything yet, but it's coming soon. So to start out, I kind of want to explain my transition from, when I started out of school, I was really an engineer, and I was kind of a corporate guy. I mean, I went and worked at Novell and worked there for a number of years and built a lot of technology. And I want to talk about how did I transition from kind of being a corporate employee to becoming an entrepreneur, and what was that like? Because definitely when you see me in that picture, I would not describe myself as an entrepreneur then. It was, I had my vision on, hey, I'm going to go work for a big company. It's going to be awesome, and I'm going to build cool things. So I kind of got started in 1996. A company called US Robotics released a product called the Pilot. And some of you may have heard of a thing called a Palm Pilot or a Palm. When they initially released this thing, it was called a Pilot. And just for a little business insight, when they released it, they got sued by the Pilot Pen Company. There's a company that I think they still exist that make pens called Pilot. And they said, you can't use that name. It's trademarked, and it's ridiculous. Oh, you got one right there. So they decided, well, we're going to transition our name to Palm rather than call ourselves Pilot. And so the next release they did was called the Palm Pilot, and then after that they dumped Pilot altogether, and it was just called Palm Computer, and they released those things. So I was at Novell in 1997 working, and a coworker of mine came in the office, and he had one of these devices that looked just like this. Black and white screen. I think they had 512K of RAM in them, and it just blew my mind. I thought, that is the coolest thing I have ever seen. And it was cheap, so I could actually buy it. Unlike Apple Newton, actually, they had a product like this before that, but it was so expensive I couldn't afford it. But I could buy one of these, so I bought one, and I started writing software for it. So, and when I first got married, my wife was like this fanatic at a game called Skip-Bo. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's kind of like Uno, but she loved that game, and she would just destroy me. We'd play the game all the time, and she beat me every time we'd play it. And I got so tired of it, I decided, you know what, I'm going to write this game for the Palm Pilot so you can play the computer and not me, and only I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to actually be able to beat you now because I'm going to write the software. So I wrote it, and she could still beat the game no matter how many times I looked in her stacks and cheated at every way I could in the software. She could still beat it. But I released it in 1998. And believe it or not, there were actually app stores back before Apple created it. They weren't anything like iTunes, but there were some sites that were dedicated to this type of software. So I released that in 1998, and then I created another one called Musician Tools, which did some music stuff. And later on, I got called as the Elders Quorum president, and I used to meet a lot with the bishopric, and they always wanted me to get the ward data out of the computer and onto everyone had these palms, and they wanted it on there so they could just look things up. And it was a disaster. It was so hard to move the data. I knew how to do it, but for anyone else to do it, it was impossible. And so they'd hand me, I'd show up on Sunday, and I'd have this hand, all of these devices, and they're like, update them all. And it was really hard to do, and I decided, I can solve this by writing some software. So I built a thing I started a company, and you'll laugh, it was called LDS Tools, which, has anyone heard of that? You probably all have it now for your wards. And I created a thing called Ward Tools, and it basically would extract the data out of MLS and let you load it on your palm, and you could then beam the data through infrared, not through any networking. You'd beam it to the other devices. So after I wrote this, I could just show up and beam all the data to everyone in the bishopric rather than going through this nightmare. Anyway, it worked so well, I decided to release it. And the other thing interesting is you'll see the prices on here you'd be like, I would never pay $10 for skip bow or pocket bow. Well, these were what the prices used to be. They were, people would pay this happily. It was $25, and then there was a steak version for $35, and man, they loved it. I had people running it all over the place. Well, eventually, it didn't really, all of these made enough money that I never bought another piece of computer equipment out of my own money. So it was at least enough that I bought laptops for me and computer for the family and printers and all that kind of stuff and paid for internet connection, but it was not enough to live off of. So it was kind of a hobby thing, but it brought in enough that I was able to do that. Just an interesting note, LDS Tools, we open sourced it, and this was about, several years ago. And the church actually, I knew the guys that were working up there on their stuff. They came to me and said, hey, we want to use that name. And so I actually donated the whole thing and the name and everything over. And then after that is when LDS Tools came out. They didn't use the software because it didn't do exactly what they did. But that's where the name actually came from. They used that, and now you guys have LDS Tools. So now you know where the name came from. Okay, so what was it like, the corporate opportunity? And this is really more of a story of what drove me to become an entrepreneur. And I don't want to be negative about working for a company. I had so many great opportunities. It was really incredible. But there were some things that really pushed me, that happened to me, that pushed me from being kind of a corporate guy to deciding, you know what, I can do this on my own. I can go start a thing and start building this. So in 1994, I was working on a product. It wasn't called ZenWorks at the time, but it was a product inside of Novell that there was a small group of us that kind of, under the covers, we created this product. And eventually it grew into a thing that was called ZenWorks. And it became a $100 million product for the company. And we had all kinds of patents and stuff like that our names are all on. There was a small group of us that was kind of the head. And the four of us eventually became the team leads of the different areas of this product. And things were going great. The product was extremely popular. It was doing really well. And as typically happens in some companies, they decided they were going to do a little bit of management shuffling. And some people came in who were more interested in their career and building their little kingdom, I guess, inside the company than they were about kind of, the product or even figuring out what was going on. So we had a guy come in, and he slowly came in and just started replacing the leads, the guys that created the product and invented it, with his people. And it was a little frustrating for us, and it ended up that all of the lead engineers left the company. We all decided, you know what, good luck, you guys want this, and we all got recruited to go leave the company. And so that was kind of one thing that happened. Interestingly enough, the company wanted me back. A different team recruited me back, and I worked on a product called iFolder, and this one will be kind of interesting to you. So iFolder, I don't know if no one's probably heard of this because it was 2002, but it was a product where you would go in and just think if this reminds you of any product you might know of. You'd go in and create a folder on your hard drive, and it would basically back up that folder constantly to the cloud. Okay, so you had it in sync all the time, and if you had multiple computers, it would keep them all in sync, and you could actually go and share the folders within there with other people, so you could have groups of folders that would share it to the cloud between everyone and keep it all in sync, and then you had web access to it as well. And we kept telling these guys, look, it's really great that you have this product that you're selling into companies, but we ought to host it. And we actually brought up a little test server to host it publicly and say this ought to be a service that people can subscribe to and just pay for it. And they just didn't understand it because, you know, they're kind of set in their ways and the way they would sell. And they eventually came in and replaced the team and said, you know, we don't know what to do with this product. We're going to send it to India, and you guys we're going to transition you to another team. And so they did that, and we were kind of like, whatever. In 2008, of course, Dropbox came out, and we were just like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So that was something that happened. Okay, in 2007, they used to give us a week of innovation. They called it Hack Week, and they just give us a week where we could do anything we wanted in the company, and it was kind of to spawn innovation. And so the first time we did this, I created this little product called Giver, and you know, we were a networking company, and we would go into conference rooms, and we'd sit across from people that had a laptop, and I had a laptop, and I wanted to give them some files, and it was impossible. The only way I could get a file from my computer to their computer was to either email it to them or log into some network and copy it up on there, and then they would log in and copy it down. And we're right here, and we've got connectivity that we should be using. And so I built a thing called Giver, which would, everyone that ran it, it would go out and discover all the machines on the network that were running it, and they'd show up, and you could just take your files and drag it to the person and let go. And then on their machine, it would pop up and say, hey, Calvin wants to send you some files. And you could say accept, and it would actually transfer the files over Wi-Fi right there without having to do any setup or anything like that. Well, once again, so I submitted this and said, hey, you know what, we ought to put this through the whole patent thing because Novell had lawyers to do all that. And I sent it through, and they said, ah, that's kind of interesting, but it doesn't, we don't know what to do with it, so we're not gonna patent it, we're just gonna let it go. And of course, long after I left to go start my own thing, in 2011, Apple released AirDrop built in their OS, which if any of you have iPhones now or whatnot, AirDrop is it's not just similar, they actually use the same mechanism underneath where they go discover another phone and you can just send things or drag it from your computer. So another product that apparently they had no use, but became quite a big deal. So, and here's the thing that really pushed me over the edge. So they came up with an innovation fund in 2008, and they allocated $4 million into this fund and said, we want people in the company to come up with ideas, and we're going to fund it if we like it. And so I was at Novell back in the day when the BlackBerry ruled everything, and Novell ignored it. And it was it was hard for them to ever come back from that because it was so popular. And I knew the iPhone is going to be this thing that if we don't jump on it, we're going to get another black eye and we're never going to come back. And so I started up a group inside the company and said, I'm going to start building mobile versions of almost everything we have so that we, on the day the App Store opens, we can be on the App Store. And actually to this day, I believe had we been able to do that, it might have made a difference for the company. We went in and we proposed this thing, and we actually got a whole bunch of people in the company super excited about it. And we started moving forward and doing this thing, and then, you know, I was on the desktop team. I didn't have anything to do with no one had anything to do with mobile because they didn't even think of it. Well, my management direction found out, you know, it went up through my management that here I am running off doing this other stuff. What am I thinking? And I had to actually sit in offices and listen to management chew me out because I was making them look bad. How could I run off and do this, all this stuff, when I should, and it's not like I wasn't delivering what I should be delivering. And it didn't bother me, because actually the first thing that happened, as soon as I started being literally yelled at in the office, I just clicked it off and said, you know what, I'm done. The App Store is coming. You guys can't see how big this is. I'm done. I'm going to leave. And so the first point I want to make is opportunities. And I'm going to have slides that kind of make a point here. There's all kinds of opportunities to do all kinds of things. And starting Appigo, I saw this opportunity as the biggest wave that I could get in front of that I'd seen since the internet back in the early 90s. I watched that kind of come and go by, and I thought, this is too big to let go. So I convinced a coworker of mine that was actually doing this innovation thing, Boyd, that we were going to leave and we were going to go start this. And the first thing we had to do was get buy-off from our families, because in order to do this, it was going to require us to work 2 full-time jobs. You know, and we weren't students, we weren't, you know, young guys. I was a seasoned engineer. I had a family, I had church callings, I had everything that I had to do. But we got buy-off that I was going to basically go to work, and, you know, from 8 to 5, and then I was going to come home and have dinner, and then I was going to work from 6 until who knows how long, but it was going to be 2 full-time jobs until we, you know, to get ready for the App Store. And we had about 4 months to do this. So to do this, we also wrote a little business plan. And again, like I said, I was not a business guy. I had no idea what a business plan even looked like. But we put together something that we imagined a business plan would look like. And it did a couple things. You know, well, basically, it helped us figure out how much money do we have to have, or how much money do we have to make in order to actually make this happen. So my next point that I'm going to give you is get advice. And this is a great, you know, none of this stuff existed when I was doing this. So to be in this program, to take this class, that's just fantastic. And there's a lot of great advice to get here. So pay attention to it, and you can learn from other people's mistakes. So we would go and get advice. We went and got some mentors of friends of mine that I know had done companies, and we would send this plan to them. This is a smaller copy of basically what we were looking at, but they would review, you know, they would review the plan. We would be able to revise it, because they'd say that, you know, this is a little weird, you're assuming this. And it helped us kind of fix it up. But all of them said, you have to do this. You know, they knew that I had been building these other apps, and they all encouraged me, you got to do this. And another thing is, we would do this research. We'd go out and listen to all kinds of lectures, and we learned about highs and lows. And one thing about running a business is there are highs. The highest highs that you can have in your career will come, and the lowest lows. And I can't remember where we heard this, but sometimes they come within minutes of each other. And we definitely experience that you're going to go through highs and lows as you do this. Next point I want to make is it takes a lot of hard work, okay? Sure, you'll hear of companies, and you may even think that our story is one of these luck companies, that we timed it right. But let me tell you, I have never worked this hard in my life to get something to go. So this little slide, it's 2 o'clock. Our goal in starting this is we wanted to have apps on the first day that the App Store opened. And we narrowed our focus down to 2 apps. My partner, Boyd, was really interested in keeping track of his gas mileage, so we created a thing called AccuFuel to do that. And I always wanted, the original iPhone didn't have any kind of a task list or to-do list on it, and I was obsessed with that, because I work out of those. And so I wanted to build the perfect to-do list. And so we would go, and like I said, 2 full-time jobs. We'd go to work from 8 to 5. We would come home and then start working at 6. And sometimes we would just work all night. And we found that any time that we worked like till 4 in the morning, we were just shot the next day. And not just for our day jobs, but when we'd get to home at night, we were so tired we could barely think. And so we made a rule. We turned on the little speech clock thing on your Mac that announces the time. And every night when our Macs would announce it's 2 o'clock, we'd make each other go to bed, because we wouldn't be able to function otherwise. So that was kind of what it took for us to kind of get this started. So the next thing I would encourage you guys is take risks. There's going to be plenty of people that are going to be willing to take risks, and if you don't take any risks, everyone else is going to, or the people you're competing with or trying to do. Risks are important to take because that's where your real leaps are you're gonna make advancements there. So we had the opportunity. Now remember, we're working inside of this company, and they just shot us down, and we decided, well, there's this developer conference that's coming up, and it's really important if we're really going to make this work to go to its Worldwide Developer Conference is what WWDC stands for. It's Apple's annual developer conference. And so what was the risk here? Well, it cost $1,600 per ticket to get in, to even get in the door. And we had to buy 2 tickets. So we had to put up the money for that. We had to buy tickets to fly to San Francisco. We had to pay for a week a hotel and all of the food and everything while we were there. So, you know, no big deal, but it was like a $5,000 or $4,000 investment for us to do this just out of our own pockets. And who knew, you know, this could mean nothing. We're going to go spend $4,000 on this weekend, on this week-long vacation, or, you know, as our wives kind of looked at it. What, you're going to go to San Francisco with him and spend all this money and I don't get to go? So, but it was a little risk for us. But when we got there, the iPhone sessions, we would walk in and the auditoriums would hold about 2,500 people. So imagine walking in and it was just packed with people to learn about how to write code for the iPhone. And now remember, this is before the SDK was released. So it was all kind, you know, there were bugs in it. Nothing worked exactly the way they documented it. And so, oh, sorry, SDK is the software development kit. So to build, the tools to build apps had never been released, and Apple changed it weekly. They would update it and everything changed and all your apps would break as you're doing it. So it was really valuable for us to be there. We met Apple employees that I still keep in contact with. We actually met the VP over all of the iPhone development. We bought these shirts. We went to Walmart and bought black t-shirts, found a printer shop to print our little logo on them. And it didn't really mean a whole lot when we were walking around alone, but when the 2 of us were together, everybody asked us, what is Appigo? What is this? You know, because there were 2 of us. And it just started conversation. So it was really interesting that something as dumb as a t-shirt would start up conversations. We met all kinds of people. We received feedback on our apps. They have labs there where we could take our apps in and they would critique it and say, hey, you ought to redesign this. And it really helped us with the AccuFuel product. It didn't look anything like it did when we released it because we redesigned the whole thing based on their feedback. We learned how to make our code actually work. Because like I said, the development kit was really buggy, and we met the engineers that wrote the developer kit, and they would say, oh yeah, that's a mess. This is how you do it. And they'd go in and show us how to get around their bugs. So when we released, the product, you know, actually worked. And then we saw a lot of competition. There were a lot of other developers there. And in one of the cases, one of our competitors, they're called OmniFocus, was actually being presented on the stage. So here we are, we walk in, and these guys are up on stage, and everyone's cheering, yeah, this is the coolest thing ever. And as soon as they went up on stage, we thought, we just spent, you know, $4,000 for nothing, because these guys are going to kill us. How are we even going to compete against this when they're on stage and we're nothing? And so it was a real low. You know, that we were sitting there in the audience just like, what, oh well, at least, you know, we had some fun doing it. These guys get up on stage and they start showing their product, and they got about halfway through the presentation and we looked at each other and we're like, we're going to kill them. Are you kidding me? Because it was really, I mean, it's a great product. I don't want to knock their product. It actually really is good, but it's meant for like construction companies to run these huge projects. It's not meant for someone to keep track of, hey, this is what I got to do today for whatever. And so we were really excited because ours was far simpler than theirs. It was far easier to use. And ours actually had synchronization. You could actually synchronize it too. You know, it wasn't, and there's all of the apps that came out. It was really interesting. When they first came out on the App Store, none of them synchronized. None of them hooked up to anything. It was all just run it on your phone and you're done. Which, you know, I wouldn't allow that to happen. I came from a networking company. We were going to hook it up to something. So I want to talk a little bit about the money. So this is what really launched us so that we could go and leave and do this full time. So July 11th came, and we made our goal. We had 2 apps on the App Store to do an AccuFuel. Both of them were, this is a little screenshot of iTunes. Both of them were in the top 100 apps, which today's is just like, wow, that's amazing. Well, there were only, 500 to 1,000 apps at the time. So it still was pretty amazing to be in the top 100. And there were, trust me, everybody was just hungry. It's like everyone just went in and said, buy all 100. I don't care, because nobody had ever had any apps on their phones. So people were hungry for it. It was a good time to be on there, but we did really well. And you can see OmniFocus right there. Our competitors were also in the top 100. One thing that's interesting, we actually became addicted to looking at our ranking, because when the App Store first opened, there was no reporting. We had no clue if we'd sold 1 or 100 copies. We didn't know how much money we were making. All we knew is where we landed in the rankings and how many support emails we had coming in. And that was our only basis for, is this even doing anything? In fact, I was actually sitting in my office once, and I had another coworker come in my office, and he said, have you seen what these apps are doing? What were we thinking? We should have had stuff done and on the App Store. And I'm sitting there playing stupid like, yeah, we're idiots. What are we thinking? Thinking, tonight I got to go home and answer 100 emails, and then do support. So we were still working the same hours after we released, except we would do 3 hours of tech support, answering emails, and then we would turn around and start fixing bugs and getting ready for new releases. So it only got more complicated once the App Store opened. So what happened? We finally, this is on August 12th, there was a meteor shower at 5 a.m. and my business partner got up to see it. And while he's up, of course, his phone's receiving email, and he goes and looks in there, and there's a financial report from Apple, first one we'd ever seen. And he held off until 6 a.m. to call me. He wanted to call me right then, but he calls me at 6 a.m. My phone rings, and I just reach over. Of course, I'm dead tired because we were up till 2 in the morning, doing what we normally do. And I answer the phone, and I'm like, what? And he says, we're quitting our jobs today. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, the first financial report came in from Apple. You need to get up and go look at it. And that's all he said. So I kind of shake my wife, and I'm like, hey, the financial report came in. We need to go look at it. And so we get up, and I go into and pull up this financial report. And it is the biggest, most complicated thing you've ever seen. I mean, I'm sure some business guy thought it was a great idea, but it had like almost every sale we had ever had in every country and store everywhere across the whole world. And I'm looking at this thing like, this doesn't even make sense. And so it takes me a long time to figure out what are all these numbers and what do they mean. And I finally get down, and I'm able to narrow it down to one number down at the bottom, and there's a column, and I'm like, I think that's the number right there. And I'm looking at it, and I get my wife, and I said, hey, I think this is the number right here. And she comes in, and she looks at it, and she says, oh, no, they've made a mistake. They have sent you the report for the entire App Store. That is not your number. And I look at it, and I'm like, no, I think that's our number, which, it wasn't like some go buy an island type of number thing, but it was a good number. It was better than what we ever imagined the number would be. I'm not going to tell you what it is, by the way, but so sure enough, working that hard for that long, 2 jobs and doing all this, we decided we are done. And we walked in. It was the best day of my life to walk into work and say, hey, guess what? I quit, and today's my last day. And they're like, what? And then what are you going to go do? Oh, I got my own thing. I'm out of here. And it was awesome. So, if you have the time, give people, be nice to them and give them the 2-week thing, but we did not have the time. So, little reality check though. This is what actually happened. It's one thing, there's a couple things we learned when we first did this. First of all, we went and ran and quit our jobs, and we didn't have any money. I mean, it's not like suddenly our bank accounts were full. All we had was a report that said, this is how many apps you sold. So the first thing I would tell you is sales numbers do not equal money in the bank. That seems pretty obvious, but it wasn't obvious to us. So in reality, if you look at our sales numbers, they were way up there. The purple is kind of our run rate of what we needed to be able to actually survive. And the blue is kind of what our bank account looked like. And you notice in July it was nothing, and in August it was nothing. So a couple things we learned. First of all, when you sell things on the App Store, they give you a report of what you sold a month ago. You don't get a report like, hey, you know, we wrapped up the month, and then a report suddenly shows up, and then the money shows up the next day. It's more like about a month goes by, and then you get a report from Apple. They say, this is what you sold a month ago, and we're going to pay you in a month for it, right? So it's delayed. Sometimes it can be almost 2 months, 2 full months before you actually get paid for what you sold. And it depends on the month and all kinds of things, but they tell you when you sign up, this is how long it's going to take us to pay you. Of course, we just agreed, yes, go on. We didn't realize it was going to take that long. So the second thing is we actually signed up our bank account with a bank called Washington Mutual, which doesn't exist anymore because they went out of business and got bought by Chase. But to make a long story short, we went with them because they had free business checking. And we thought, great, it's not going to cost us anything. Except the fact that they couldn't receive international wires because they were such a small bank. And Apple, when they initially started paying you, you got wired in from all over the world. Every store around the world would wire the money into your company. More than half of our sales came from outside the US, so that big number we were so excited about, even though we had to wait a month and a half to get it, we only got like a small part of it because all of the international wires that were coming in failed. So that's the second lesson we learned is, we didn't know anything about this, so make sure that you know how your payments are coming in and that your bank can handle those payments when they do come in. It took us quite a while. We actually didn't get the international money until about February of the next year. So we really had to kind of scrape by and live off of some of it. But let me tell you, man, in February, that was a good month. That was like, I didn't put it on here. But the second thing is sales started to taper off. They were really good at the beginning and they started tapering off. And we didn't really think about it. But, when you have software out there or any product for that matter, you gotta keep pushing it. You got to talk about it. You got to do releases. You got to hype it up. You got to talk to your people and do press things. And we didn't really think about that. And so our sales started to taper down. And we're like, oh, no, this may end in November. That was short. Now we got to go beg for jobs again. But fortunately, we figured it out and were able to get on a release cycle and start turning the product. And it made all the difference. So the next point I want to make is to be flexible. Okay, January of 2010 comes along. We've been doing this now for 1.5 years, and we're feeling pretty confident of ourselves, and we think, hey, you know what we need? We need a plan. Rather than just kind of keep churning this stuff, let's make a plan of what we're going to do, and we're going to do a 3-month plan, and we're going to do a long-term plan. It's going to be great. And so we had several people working for us by then, and we get the whole team together, and we're like, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. These are the updates we're going to make to To-Do. We're going to do some other data updates here, and we're going to build a native Mac platform. Because all of our competitors have these Mac apps, and people like that because they can use it on their desktop. And so we had this great plan, and we immediately turned and started executing on it through January. And then January 27th came along, and Apple introduces the iPad. And we're kind of like, okay, our plan sucks. It doesn't even make sense now because we can see that this is going to be as big of an opportunity as the original iPhone was, or the original App Store was, because now there's this new platform that everybody's going to want, and they're not going to just want the old apps that were on the iPhone. They want this new formatted stuff that looks skeuomorphic. It's the kind of the realistic looking UI that Apple has abandoned now, but at the time, everybody wanted, they wanted your notes to look like a notepad, and they wanted your calendar to look like a little ringed calendar. And so we completely tossed out the plan that we made, and we came up with a new plan and decided we're going to build 2 apps. And we did. We ended up building Corculus and a specialized version of To-Do for iPad. So Corculus was kind of this, we had this idea, we wanted to build this idea board, only it was nothing like this. It was an idea app. and it didn't look anything like, it was for the iPhone, and we kind of had a little idea what we were going to do, but when the iPad came out, we completely changed what we were going to do. And this was actually a brainchild of, a lot of it came from my wife, and she is probably the biggest user of Corculus there is. She's very visual, she doesn't like lists, and when she plans things, she wants to see clusters of things so she can see there's a lot here and not a lot here, and visually be able to look at it rather than just having lists of things. So she inspired this quite a bit. Now, something interesting about this, when we originally were going to put it out, it was called Paddleum. And we thought that was a clever name, but Apple rejected it because it had the word pad in it. And now they would probably approve it, but when the iPad first came out, man, they were protective of that word. They did not let anything that had the pad in it go out. So we're sitting, and here's an interesting thing. Steve probably doesn't even know this, but we're sitting in the 2010 app contest that you guys have here. And one of our employees, Reed Olson, was competing in that. He had an app called Hippo Blast that he had submitted. And we're sitting in the back of that, and we're all excited, you know, because we finally have an app submitted, and we get an email while we're in the back of the room that Apple has rejected this because it has the word pad in it. And we're like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So we're kind of sitting there, and I don't remember who the guy, we were in the room with a bunch of people back there, and a friend of someone's back there, and we're showing it to him. We said, we just got rejected because of this. And he kind of looks at it, and he says, why don't you call it Corculus? Just like that. And we're like, why don't, that's a good name. And we're sitting in the back of the contest. We look it up. We do a trademark search. No one has used the name. We go out and we change the graphic. We recompile the code. We change it on iTunes, and we submit it in the back of the room at the app contest and submitted Corculus so that we could make it on time. So there's a little kind of interesting thing for you guys. This is what the iPad version looked like. Like I said, it was very much the skeuomorphic design that had the realistic, you know, the pages would actually go over the binders. And you could actually go in and substitute. We had multiple binders you could switch it to if you wanted gold rings or you wanted a leather binder and all this stuff. So it was kind of fun. We were actually going to do like these little plastic inserts. It's a throwback from Franklin Planner. We were going to do like BYU insert and stuff. But then we found out you got to license all that stuff, and so we never did. But it was like hugely popular. I mean, people just went nuts seeing that kind of design. And so this is the actual proof. May 12th, 2010, when you become the #1 app on the App Store, they actually put your icon as the badge of honor at the #1 spot. So there we were, and we sat there for about 4 days in front of Apple's own apps. You know, you got Pages and Keynote and their stuff there. So we kind of felt like, you know, they should send us an award for beating their apps. But it was kind of, we were at Angry Birds was on here too somewhere, but they were down a little bit farther. Okay, so the next thing I would recommend, or my next point to give you, is stay focused. At Appigo, before 2013, we had the to-do app, we had AccuFuel, we had Notebook, and pretty soon we started having all of these apps. And it sounded like a great idea because every time you'd release a new app, you could go, you know, to all your existing customers and be like, hey, we have a new app, and all of them would go buy it because you know, they love you. And we actually had people that would write in and say, I will buy every single app you guys ever put out. They didn't even care. They just said, well, I love your app so much, I'll buy everything you guys make. So, you know, obviously we thought, that's great, we'll keep making them. Well, every time you make an app, it just multiplies the complexity of your company. Maintaining it, supporting it, marketing it, and it just gets, I mean, that's how many we had, and half of them are to-do related. And it was just overrunning us. We could not market them. We couldn't get a clear message across. And so it was really hard for us to focus. And fortunately, early in 2013, we decided we have got to fix this problem. We need to focus, and we need to build something. And so we decided to-do was obviously the best seller, and we decided we're going to build a service. We're tired of this app racket of constantly having to update apps and, you know, do this thing, because everybody expected apps to be updated every 2 weeks and have 1 million new features. And you can't do that to software that's productivity stuff, because you can't just keep throwing features in there. It gets so complicated, no one can use it. So we decided, you know what, we're going to build a service that has all the features that To-Do has, except it's cloud-based, and it'll keep everything in sync and do all this nice stuff. So we started switching our model from selling apps to giving away the apps and selling a subscription, a service. And the service was actually cheaper for you to subscribe to than buying every platform we had on all the different devices. You'd get them all for free if you were a subscriber. We never did Android before this, and typically the Android apps don't sell. Okay, you can't build an Android app and say, hey, I'm going to sell this and expect to do nearly as well as you do if you sell an iPhone app. But Android is still a huge platform, and there's a lot of users, and if you're going to try to sell into businesses for this collaborative thing, we needed Android because there's always people that have a mix. So I put on my Android hat and wrote the Android client. I don't know why Corculus is on there. It shouldn't be. So just strike that, because that's a mistake. It was probably a copy and paste error. So let me show you a little difference between the revenue of a service versus apps. So apps, the yellow line you see, one day, man, you're like 1 month, you're like, wow, look at we did, I can't believe how well we did. And then the next month you're like, oh, that must have been a fluke. What happened? And then the next month, hey, it's up again a little bit and then down. And sometimes you had no idea. Some of these were because we do releases and we do these big pushes. And other times we would have no idea. One time our sales just took off. And we even had like competitors asking us, what the heck did you guys do? How did you do that? Because I knew some of the other guys. And in this one case, it turned out that Howard Stern was a To-Do user. And on his radio show, he started pushing it. We had no clue until a user wrote in and said, hey, congratulations on being on the Howard Stern show. And we're like, what? And we're all like, you go look at it. I'm not going to that website. And none of us wanted to even go look at his website. Don't go look, by the way. You don't want to see. Anyway, we weren't really psyched about it was great for us. I mean, we were excited that it affected the sales, but stuff like that happened all the time. It was completely random, and the sales on apps are just up and down depending on how you push them. And if you look at the sales of the service, there's kind of this nice smooth ramp. And if the straight lines in the middle are kind of the averaging. I just said show the average. Now, if you're a business guy, what do you want your slope to look like? Do you want it to be that flat one or that nice growing thing? Interestingly enough, that growing line is what sold the company. Had we just kept with our apps, it's likely we never would have, I'd still be doing it. We wouldn't have sold the company. But as soon as people started seeing that line and saw that's recurring revenue, those are subscribers, that's not like you just putting out updates all the time, they were interested. So there's a big difference in those two models, and we were pretty excited about it. It was better for us. It was better for the customers. I got to hustle now. I'm going to fly through these last slides because I know the time's up. So another point, competition is a good thing. It validates your market. A lot of times the reason there's no competitors on a market is because there's no market. So competition is a good thing. It'll drive you to innovate, and it'll bring focus to what you do. Go out and look this up, okay? If you've never seen this TED video, it's a video about spaghetti sauce and how the market changed when one guy decided there's no best product, okay? There are best products, and everyone's different, and they all like different products. So one person doesn't necessarily always have to win. So go watch that. It's fascinating. Okay, my final notes, work as a team. Don't try to do this alone. You can bounce ideas off of people, find someone you work well with, but make sure you document and review your agreements with the people you work with. Next one is be frugal. You don't have to get funding to do this. We didn't have funding. We sacrificed a little. We took some extra risks. All we had were a couple MacBooks, our tickets, and our business registration. So you don't necessarily have to get funding. And I'm going to end on this one. What would I have done differently? The first thing is I would have had a better exit strategy. We went and talked to people to try and get advice, and they would say, what's your exit strategy? And I'm like, I'm not like you guys. I'm creating a business that's going to last forever. And they're like, okay. I would have an exit strategy. How am I going to leave this company? Is it going to be I'm going to sell it? Am I going to sell to my partner? have some type of agreement and some strategy, because even if you think it's never going to happen, I didn't think it was going to happen, and I sold the company. And had we planned a little differently, you know, it might have changed things during the sale. So creating your entity, here's one more thought to think about. When we sold Appigo, we had all these apps. And when we sold it, they weren't really interested in Appigo, they were interested in To-Do. And to surgically remove all of those other apps out of Appigo or just give them To-Do was really hard to do. So when you go to set up an entity, if I were to do it again, I would have set up an entity for every single one of our apps and then set up an owning entity to own them all, so that if anyone came and said, I want to buy this app, we can be like, there you go, it's the whole thing, the company, everything, we don't need to do anything. It's all, you just push it over to them and it's done. So think about that when you set up your company. By the way, setting up an LLC in Utah is like the easiest thing in the world. It takes like 20 minutes. You go to the state website, it costs $70. And do it if you've got something that you're selling, create an entity to protect yourself. Otherwise, they can come to you personally. So look into that, and I encourage you to do that. Don't hire anyone that you can't absolutely live without. Okay? My favorite quote is, every person you hire, you may have to either lay them off or fire them. So if it's your best friend, think about that. Do you want to lay them off or fire them? If it's someone in your ward that really needs the help, do you want to lay them off or fire them? Because it could happen. So when you go to hire people, hire the right people and only hire them if you really need them for the company to keep going. Stay small. A lot of companies, as soon as they get money, they just explode into a staff, and it slows them down and can ruin a lot of things. So stay small. And then I told you to focus. Stay focused on the thing that you started the company to do, that's important for you to do, and you'll likely be successful. Getting started, I'm just going to skip over that and end because we're over the time. So thanks.